Now, welcome back. Yesterday, the former chief financial officer of the disgraced Steinhoff, Ben Grange, was sentenced to 10 years in prison for his role in one of South Africa's largest corporate fraud cases. The Pretoria Commercial Crimes Court handed down a 10-year sentence with a 5-year suspended as part of a plea agreement. Now, many are looking at this and asking, of course, given how devastating the Steinhoff fraud, collapse, scandal, however you want to put it, happened. Somebody as important as Ben Grange and somebody as Marcus Jooste, of course, who has committed suicide, passed on, was not able there to account to the public. Somebody like Grange could have had a heavier sentence given to him, but of course the courts had made its supposed judgment with regards to that. So the question arises is, did this punishment fit the actual crime? Joining us now, I'd like to welcome the Executive Director of Corruption Watch, Karam Singh. Karam, good day. Thank you so much for joining us here on News in Focus on Hilaal TV.
Thank you so much for having me on the program.
No, absolute pleasure. I think, Karam, it's 7 years now since Steinhoff really took a flight with regards to this corruption scandal that occurred there. I mean, we got 5 years suspended. It was a 10-year sentence. Do you honestly feel this was a fitting punishment for what Grange had done?
Yes, I understand the frustration and the question. This is one of the biggest corporate frauds we've seen in South African history. And this is an individual that was highly implicated in it, although the court went at length to say that he wasn't the kingpin. That was Marcus Jooste, certainly. I think we have to put this into context. The MPA have been in a very difficult position for a long time. They've got capacity issues when it comes to prosecuting these high-profile commercial crime cases. In a context where they have a criminally accused who's willing to plead guilty, you can imagine under the current circumstances that is something which, under the right circumstances, is appealing to the prosecution services, particularly in a context where this individual may give testimony which could then lead to the successful prosecution of others. So I think it's within that context that we see a sentence which, on the face of it, within the court of public opinion, seemed like a lenient sentence because of the havoc that was created by this scandal. We have to get over any idea that corruption is some kind of a victimless crime, and that corporate corruption is something that can be dealt with, amongst the shareholders in the boardroom. This has implications for all of us, and people are right to want to see consequences and real criminal accountability for wrongdoing.
Yeah, and I think, as an investor, as somebody, of course, put money within stocks of Steinhoff, I mean, they would want to see, the corruption being, dealt with quite severely. I want to bring up the NPA because, you listen to Advocate Shamila Patoe, and really funding has been their biggest challenge. And, she was, if I stand to be correct, on one of the portfolio committees for Parliament saying, well, we hope now that this could change under the 7th administration. For corruption to be dealt with effectively, I mean, that's one institute that really does need, proper funding to allow them to go ahead and chase so much. It's not just they're dealing with Steinhoff, they're also dealing with, the Zondo State Capture Commission. And also, you've got the VBS Mutual Bank, which is another one that also needs to be looked at with a magnifying glass.
Yes, absolutely. This is not just a question. It is about funding, but it's not just about funding. It's also about, capacitating the organization to be able to execute its mandate, to not only prosecute, the heavy burden in terms of the kind of violent crime that we have in the country, but these commercial crime cases, these corruption cases. The MPA was definitely hobbled. It was captured in the era of state capture, and it's been tough for the current leadership to really reestablish the credibility, the effectiveness the MPA that it can fully execute its mandate. But certainly, there needs to be funding for the criminal justice sector, whether it be in the prosecution services in terms of funding the courts, to make the whole system, run more effectively. Because at the moment it takes way too long, and we've seen very few prosecutions in relationship to all of those that have been implicated and accused.
Karam, when it comes to the private sector and fraud within the private sector, 2 years ago, when a lot of revelations had occurred, and that was 5 years on from the Steinhoff debacle. I had its former chairperson, Christo Visa, on, and he said that when looking at white-collar crime, it's very difficult for government to get involved because the private sector would say, well, it's private funding. But how do we measure the balance in terms of holding corporates or those who commit white-collar crime to account, but also at the same time making sure that institutions like the NPA have that mandate to go ahead and investigate them so that they cannot go ahead and get away scot-free?
Yeah, well, I think you've hit the nail on the head when you talk about the investigations, and then translating effective investigations into prosecutable cases. The problem with white-collar crime, the problem with corruption, is that it happens, behind closed doors. It happens in a way which is not always very easy to detect. Detecting these types of schemes often involve whistleblowers coming forth, people putting their lives and their families' lives and their careers in peril. So, do the police have the capacity to do the effective investigations of the corporate sector? Are we confident as a South African society that that we live with good corporate actors who follow the law? Or do we suspect that there are other Steinhoffs, lurking around the corner? There are other corporate scandals, involving syndicated crime, involving corruption, and involving backhanders to politicians and political parties. This is what we understand as the kind of current corruption challenge in the country. So the private sector is not going to do it on its own. It's not able to self-regulate itself. And we need the MPA to be able to prosecute these cases, and even in some cases, going back to the issue of plea deals, to be able to negotiate under right circumstances with corporates that they can have deferred prosecution agreements where they can admit to what's happened, pay fines, not be prosecuted any further, but under a watch list or under a context where there's a cooling off period or there's a blacklisting in terms of being able to do business with government in the future. So, we need to be creative in terms of, how we breathe life into the criminal justice system. And it's not necessarily always going to be prosecutions in every case. In other cases, we have to recover assets. In other cases, people need to be blacklisted.
Karam, I want to shift to, obviously the VBS Mutual Bank. So now we've got the current Justice Minister, Thembisa Malane, who's currently, facing an ANC Integrity Commission. I mean, this was around the same time of Steinhoff. Of course, we saw the devastation that happened with regards to VBS Mutual Bank. And I'd like to think of it as being more severe because it had elderly women who had put, elderly men and women, I beg your pardon, who had put money into a bank. And this is the case that had happened. Again, the NPA would say, well, again, there needs to be, depth of assistance to try and investigate that. From a cracking the whip of a corruption case, I mean, I know the 7th administration is only, 3 months old, but is there a confidence from Corruption Watch's perspective that this new administration will, whip that anti-corruption whip, take that anti-corruption whip and say, we're going to be much more severe in dealing with some of these cases that are still lingering on?
I think it remains to be seen. I don't want to give a false sense of optimism. I also don't want to be overly cynical or pessimistic. I do think that the government of national unity does create new opportunities for accountability within the executive, more eyes on different types of portfolios where we know There's elements of systemic corruption. But it is concerning that there's still people in cabinet that have clouds over their heads, people, from the previous administration who have issues which have not been fully resolved in terms of corruption allegations. You talk about the challenges facing the Minister of Justice now, and a kind of sense that she hasn't really, given satisfactory answers yet, to deal with the expose that's come out. So we have to we have to be vigilant. One thing that's been very encouraging, I think, is some of the moves that are happening at Parliament. And I was able to sit in a briefing last week with the new chair of the SCOPA committee, Songezo Zibi, and I was really, really encouraged by his reading of the situation, his understanding of the role that SCOPA must play, his understanding of the role that Parliament must play in terms of oversight. So I think we do have raised expectations, in terms of plurality of parties in Parliament, that Parliament will play a much bigger role in terms of its oversight over the executive. But whether we've turned a corner successfully on state capture, on wide-scale corruption and kind of grand corruption, I think the jury's still out on that, and I don't think we can confidently say that we're on the right trajectory yet.
Karam Singh, thank you so much for joining us here on News in Focus on Hilaal TV. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much.
That's Karam Singh, Executive Director of Corruption Watch. Yeah, it's not just Steinhoff. It's not just, of course, VPS Mutual Bank. It's also the SOEs, where there's still depths of investigations occurring there, especially when it comes to Eskom, PRASA, and Transnet, all key state institutions that are still trying to recover from those dark days of state capture. Well, it's up to government institutions within Parliament like SCOPA to go ahead and crack that whip. But that's all we have for you here on News in Focus from myself, Faraz Patel, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg. To have yourself a good weekend and most importantly, a safe one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.